Hey everyone, I'm Nick Colley. I'm a front-end developer and I work at the Government Digital Service. We're part of the Cabinet Office. So today I wanted to talk to you about accessibility in the GovUK design system. GovUK is the best place to find government services and information online. I thought that there'd be more people who live in the UK, so maybe you've not used our services, but if you are, you might have used it to tax your vehicle, maybe to check guidance on keeping a micropig. I was new to this guidance, but actually, if you want to keep a micropig, you're basically a farmer, so you can't walk your pig without a license. And hopefully, you've registered to vote. Yeah, woo! Registered to vote, woo! So I wanted to talk about how GovUK was put together to give you context of why we might need a design system. Before GovUK, there was a ton of different websites that looked and behaved differently, but fundamentally they served a similar purpose. From a user's point of view, there was no need for them to be different. So we had 750 top-level domains, and we needed to go from that to one top-level domain, which is gov.uk. While this has taken time, most content is now in one place with a consistent user experience and brand. We now have 300,000 pieces of content from across government published, and gov.uk now has more visits in a single month than there are people in the UK. But government online is not just content. It also includes transactional services that rely on users inputting data. So we have 780 services that account for over 1 billion transactions a year. So why does government need a design system? If merging a bunch of sites together can give a consistent experience, surely we don't need a design system. Problem solved. From a technical perspective, content can be centralized, but services cannot. So that means departments across the UK are building services in different technical stacks and on different domains, but they all need to look the same. So if you're a business and you're trying to hire your first employee, you need information and services from 5 different areas of government. So I've made like a really fake and exaggerated, this isn't real, user journey to illustrate this. A user could start at a page owned by GDS, which is a content page, and it could go through any number of different departments running services and then come back to us. From a technical perspective, this is kind of where you could be in, where all of these departments use different technologies, pretty much every technology you could think of. But users should not have to understand how government works. So how do you create a consistent experience for both content and services with distributed teams? So this is where the GovUK design system comes in. It's built from years of research and work from teams across government. There were already volunteer-led projects that laid the foundation, but this is the first time we've had a dedicated team to work on this problem. The GovUK design system brings together styles, components, and patterns. So for styles, we have things like color and spacing, layout, and typography. For components, we have things like buttons, tabs, checkboxes, kind of thing you're used to. And then we have patterns. So sometimes these are referred to as design patterns. So if we want to ask users for a date, this is a very common thing across many services, so we can put this together as a pattern, and this can then be shared. Often patterns have components, but they don't have to have components to exist. So something we spend a lot of time on, and we're quite proud of, is the accessibility we do on the GovUK design system. But why do we care about accessibility? 20% of people in the UK have a disability. This could be a visual, hearing, motor, or cognitive impairment. So that's around 13 million people. Although my maths could be really crap, so. But if we think of accessibility in terms of exclusion and inclusion, we can think of people's experience as more of a spectrum and not just about permanent disability. So the example I wanted to show today is from Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit, and it shows how motor-based impairments can impact anyone. So someone who's lost motor function in one arm might find operating a keyboard to be difficult. But if you broke your arm skiing, you might experience some of the same barriers. This is called a temporary impairment, since over time your arm will heal. The final end of the spectrum is designing for someone who maybe is a new parent, and while they're used to normally being able to use their keyboard, they're holding their child. So effectively, they've only got use of one arm. This is called a situational impairment, but by designing for everyone on this, by designing for people with a permanent disability, we make our services usable to everyone. So one example I wanted to share with you is from an Ofcom study. They found that 80% of television viewers use subtitles other than for hearing impairment. And we can also see this in social media, where videos will often have autoplay with subtitles. So if you're on the go, you can consume videos without actually having to put on headphones or something like that. So raise your hand if you work in the public sector or charities or something like this. Yeah? Right, I can see you. There's like maybe about 5 people. Right, so this is for you. There's two regulations. So you've got the Equality Act, which legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and wider society. But more recently, we've got this really long-ass one that I'm not even going to say because it's so long, which is an EU directive, which is much more specific to the web, and it can be enforced easier. So this one actually enforces the web content accessibility guidelines. So I tried to make that into a meme, but I'm not like a meme specialist, so yeah. So if you can't see the screen, you've got I don't even know which movie this was, but you've got the Sith guy at the back. He represents people who don't like accessibility, and then you got the Jedis there. They like accessibility, and then the stick that they have is the Equality Act and the EU directive. So, right, how do we meet these needs? So we do a lot of stuff, but I just want to focus on the requirements we give to services. To meet government accessibility requirements, we ask that they try to do these 3 things. Meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, sometimes referred to as WCAG, test with assistive technologies, and do user research with real users. I'm going to go through these one by one. If you've not heard of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, they're really cool. They're a standardized, recommended set of guidelines that is used all across the industry. And they explain how to make digital services and websites accessible to everyone. They mainly focus on users with impairments to vision, hearing, motor, and cognitive. So vision is people with sight impairments, or could be people with color blindness, that kind of thing. Hearing, people with hard of hearing or deafness. Motor, this might be people that struggle to use a mouse or a keyboard. And then cognitive, so there's people that maybe have dyslexia or learning difficulties. If you're new to WCAG, which it sounds weird saying it on a stage, if you're new to WCAG, it can be a bit daunting. So one place I like to start is with something you can just do and then have a look at it and then see what comes out. So automated testing is a really good way to get started. There's many different automated tools, but I personally found that Axe, which is an accessibility, and I'm not going to read that out, but we found this one works really well. If you want to use it, it's in every copy of Google Developer Tools. So if you, oops. Bad example. It's not actually, it's the third party. So in this case, most of the issues with the third party supplier of the ticket and software, so you can blame them. If you right-click a page and press inspect, it will bring up your developer tools, and then there is an audit option, and you can run this without having to install anything. So that's really cool. Axe is awesome because you can use it and put it into anything. So here's an example where we've put it alongside one of our code examples. And this is interesting because some accessibility automation can only be checked by a person. So for this one, we can only show this in this scenario. It's not a very useful example, but hopefully you get the gist of it. It also works on the command line, so if you want to fail your builds, it's part of your development workflow. You might be thinking, sweet, I'm going to install this, and then all my accessibility issues, they've gone away, that's it. Yeah? All right. Only around 30% of issues can be picked up by automation. So the accessibility team at GDS went through as many automation tools as they could, and they built the worst web page in the world. So they tried to make the least accessible web page they could think of, and it could only find 30% of issues. So the rest of 70% needs to be done by people. So there's many different things you can do, but I just wanted to show you one example, which is the work we do to support users who change colors on GovUK. So high contrast is normally associated with good accessibility, but for some users it causes visual stress, which means they prefer to customize the colors they use to read your site. So an example of this is people with dyslexia will find, some people with dyslexia will find it easier to change their colors, and it will reduce the impact. So in the example I've got here, we've got a radio group, and it asks, have you changed your name, with two options, yes or no. The first input is focused. Since our radio inputs are custom components, we have to do extra work to make sure that we haven't lost this focus when people change their colors. So in the second example, it looks a bit different, but when we tested it, we found that it no longer made sense anymore, so you didn't know where you were focused on the page. So we added some extra styles to ensure that even when you change your colors, you can still use the site as well as if you had the regular experience. One of the things you might consider is an external accessibility audit. This is really useful to get an expert's insight or guidance, which is something we often do. Okay, so the second thing I wanted to talk about was testing with assistive technologies. Assistive technologies help people overcome environments that exclude them based on certain disabilities or impairments. So common assistive technologies include mobility aids, such as wheelchairs or crutches. On the web or in computing, we have some lesser known assistive technologies, but they're equally as important. So we test in the 5 most commonly used assistive technologies. JAWS, NVDA, and VoiceOver are all examples of screen readers. Screen readers read out a web page and are often used by people with sight impairments, but it can also help people who have trouble reading English or people with severe dyslexia. Often people with disabilities use multiple different technologies and they intersect each other. So you might also use something called zoom text, which will zoom a page often to 400%. Or finally, you might use something called Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is, allows you to dictate commands to the computer. So has anyone seen Blade Runner? I don't know if this is going to work. Yeah? Right, here we go. You remember the scene where Deckard zoom in an image with his voice? Looks a bit like this, and he's like, looking a bit like this. And then, yeah, enhance. Anyone seen that one? Dragon Naturally Speaking is basically that, and it's really cool. So you feel like Britney Spears, you got like a microphone. And this is mouse grid mode. So if you've built a bad, inaccessible experience and you can't say, hey, click this button because it's a div or something like, it's an element that isn't represented as a button, then you might have to turn this mode on, and then you can pretend to be decade, but it's not really what you want. So we put all this stuff into what we call the Accessibility Empathy Lab, so we can test these things. But you might be thinking, that sounds like loads of effort and money, and that some of those are Windows only. So if you want to start, Annika from the accessibility team has written a blog post which you can test with assistive technologies for free, so on any operating system. Cool. So I think it's worth noting that when using assistive technologies, it's tempting to try and fix oddities around how the technology works. We can't make decisions based on what we consider to be odd. That's a regular experience for someone who actually uses these things day to day. So one frequent example of this is when assistive technologies often mispronounce content. So we had one where a screen reader would pronounce gov.uk as governor. So if you're new to these things, you're like, well, that's broken, we need to fix that. But this could be a very common case if this is what you use every day. So the best way to do it is, based on what Leonie Watson says, is to write content that works for everyone, not specifically screen readers. Here's another quote from Robin, who said that designing programs to build compassion and understanding for disabled people in the total absence of consultation with disabled people is very silly. So this leads to last step. So including users with disabilities in user research. One of the best parts of user-centered design is doing research with your users, and this applies equally well to accessibility. Our team doesn't build live services, so researching in a real-world context can be difficult. Doing research with users can be expensive, so we don't want to do a full round of testing for one addition to the design system. In the past, we've tried testing components on their own, but this puts users in an unrealistic scenario. One way we try to get around this is to put multiple additions together into a fake service. So users think that they're going through, that we're testing the service, but actually we're testing this service we don't care about. We care about those individual components. This has been successful, but it takes time to put together. So we think that the best research comes from real-world usage in real services. So this is why some of our components, you might see the label experimental on them. It allows us to ship patterns and components we think need more research to validate it, and gives people opportunity to share research with us. Over time, we might get enough of these that we decide to make another fake service and go through it, but we hope that the community will help us research these things. So with all this in mind, a design system is only as good as the community it represents. I was going to put that people slide in, but I didn't. Yeah, I did take a picture, but yeah, sorry everyone, I ruined it. Design systems can't make services accessible on their own. So we're working on one bit of it. The rest of the service also needs to be accessible. Here's a quote from a senior product manager, redacted name. Using the design system means we don't need to think about accessibility. Kathy Dutton wrote this in her article, Problem with Patterns, where she says, because patterns are built for reuse, they sometimes encourage us to use them without question. This isn't a unique problem to accessibility. Patterns and design systems can give people the full sense of security that they don't need to do their own research. So patterns shouldn't replace the design process. With this in mind, design systems are a starting point. Everything I've covered here ideally should be done by service teams we support. But by fixing the most basic accessibility issues in the reusable components and patterns, we give service teams the time to focus on the hard problems specific to their service that we don't even know about. So when building design systems, we have a lot of responsibility. We can make inaccessible patterns widespread, or we can take the opportunity to make all our services more accessible by default. If you're starting out, don't worry about being perfect. You don't need to do all this stuff. Maybe just pick one thing and try it out. Maybe just run the automated test and see what happens. As Leonie Watson says, do just one thing to make it a little better than yesterday. Cheers, thank you.